make some subtle CSS tweaks. First, I think it'd be cool if when you click the star to highlight somebody, that color change happens a little gradually. Not too gradually, but a little gradually. Let's see how we could do that. It's really easy. We already have a rule for student classes, right? I'm just going to add one thing to that. Transition. Shorthand property combines 4 of the transition properties into a single property. All right, it's actually the only one we want is duration. I'm just going to make it 1 second just so we can see it happen super gradually so that we know it's working. So let's say 1 second. Refresh the page. Hit it. Ooh. Fade. Nice. A little slow. Makes it feel like your mouse click doesn't have much of an effect. I like some more instantaneous feedback, but not quite instantaneous. Let's go down to 0.25 seconds. There, that feels very responsive, but it still looks kind of nice. It just looks like a little more care was put into it. Yeah. So this transition effect applies to certain properties that change. So since the same thing could get a different background color thanks to the promoted class here being added, that's going to make both the background color and the border color change sort of gradually. The border color isn't terribly noticeable anyway. I like it. I'm keeping it. This is a very small commit, obviously, but add CSS transition. Now let's make the type look a little less generic. This is just the default H1 font in Foundation, which is Helvetica Neue. Failing that, Helvetica. Failing that, Roboto. Failing that, Arial. So it may very well be Arial on Windows machines. Yes, sir. That means that there is another rule overriding that. So in this case, you see font size 1.25 rem. Look up and we see font size 2.5 rem. So exactly when one rule overrides another is kind of complicated. There are some things that are pretty easy to tell. Sometimes it is as simple as one of them appears higher up in the style sheet or appears in a style sheet that is linked earlier in the markup. That's why we put app CSS last, so that our styles will apply if that's the only reason that they're not applying. So that the order in which we're including them is not going to keep them from applying. There could still be other things. Specificity is the other big reason. If we look at this, that just says H2. This just says H2. So this is over, oh no, this says H2, but it has a media specifier in addition. So that is a more specific rule. Things like adding a class make it more specific. Adding an ID makes it more specific. Specifying that it's the descendant of something else is more specific. Seth, I know you've found a link before that is actually a calculator, a specificity calculator. Yeah, throw that link in Slack. So you can paste 2 selectors into this thing and it'll tell you which one is more specific. Now, if they're the same, if they have the same number of points, basically, then it's just going to depend on which rule appears first. And the most recently added rule is going to take precedence. But there are other things you can do most of the time, like adding a class somewhere. That would make it more specific. I think I've mentioned before, I prefer not to add classes unless I really need to. So if there's another way that I can make that rule more specific, I tend to do that without changing the markup. For example, saying that it is a descendant of something, because that doesn't require me to change the markup, only my CSS. So it just depends, but that is what that means. And here's that link, specificity.keegan.st. A visual way to understand CSS specificity, change the selectors or paste in your own. And we see there are no inline styles. That's when you use the style tag in HTML, or excuse me, the style attribute. There are no IDs on this one. Now, classes, attributes, and pseudo classes, there are two of them. So a pseudo class first child, an actual class title. If we had attributes selectors where we use the square brackets, that would also count as another point. Elements and pseudo elements. So the li, the h2. Down here, we have no inline styles again, but we do have an ID, so that gets us a point. Classes, we have two of them, selected and the pseudo class hover. Elements and pseudo elements, we have the A. Notice it's even highlighting them in colors. So it looks like we have 4 here and 4 here. So these are tied. So we have this rule for student, and this rule for a student that immediately follows another student with the adjacent sibling selector. So that gives us 2 points. So this is more specific. So since that has more points, if we were to put this rule above the other one, we would still get the border top none over this border for elements that match this rule because it's more specific. Now I like them in this order anyway. But there's that.